Okay, hello and welcome back. So, in this video, we're going to look at setting up Diffy, which is a really cool tool for building AI applications, Gen AI tools like chatbots and agents, and we're going to run it on Amazon EC2. So, I'm here in the EC2 console. I'm going to go over to my instance list. You'll see there's nothing here. I'm in the Oregon region. You could really use any region though for this test. It doesn't have to be Oregon. I'm going to click on Launch Instances and we'll go ahead and set one up. And I want to keep costs relatively low. So I'm going to choose ARM instead of x86. This way I can use Amazon's very cost-effective Graviton processors. We're going to use a T4G.large. This is probably a little bigger than we need, honestly. The T4G.large has 8 gigabytes of memory. I may not actually need that much for this, but let's be safe. Better safe than sorry. We will use Ubuntu 24. And of course, we need to give our instance a friendly, memorable name. So let's go with Diffybox or something like that. Diffybox seems okay to me. Normally, to do the demo I'm about to do, you would also have to open up the Route 53 console and set up a domain name, assuming, of course, that you have a hosted zone in Route 53. If not, you'd go into your DNS provider, whoever they are, could be some other provider. You'd go in there and you'd set up an A record that points to your instance's IP address. I'm not going to do that in this demo because I have a set of AWS Lambda functions that actually do that for me. So what's going to happen is a new A record is going to get created that points to diffybox.jeremypeterson.com. So if you see me using this URL in the video in some of the configuration steps, just know that it came from the name tag on the instance, and it's something that got created for me automatically via a Lambda function I set up. Okay, so of course I need to choose an SSH key pair here, and I also need to go ahead and choose a public subnet in which to deploy my instance so that I can have, of course, a public IP address. So I'll click Edit on the network settings. We'll go ahead and set up in US West 2A here. I will assign both a standard IPv4 address and a shiny new IPv6 public address. And again, just double check that you're doing this in a public subnet. You really need to be able to reach the internet if you want to get into Diffy and use the Diffy web interface. I'm not going to set up a new security group. I will actually choose an existing one called Web that has ports 80 and 443 open, which is really all you need for a web app like Diffy. I'm going to set up my disk space here. Let's do a power of 2. We'll do 64 gigabytes, and we'll use the default highest performance general purpose SSD, which is GP3 at the time I'm recording this. I'm going to open up Advanced, go to the root volume here, and also turn on encryption. I'm a big fan of encrypting things at rest. I think it's usually a good idea to do that. So here I am setting up encryption at rest with this KMS key here. This is the one I use for all my EBS volumes. I then need to open up Advanced Details down at the bottom here, Advanced Details. And what we're going to do is add an IAM instance profile here in case later on we need to maybe, I don't know, access AWS services, right? It's possible that I may want to use Poly or Lex or other AWS AI services, or maybe AWS Bedrock, which is the serverless platform that allows you to use LLMs from within your AWS account. All right, so I'll click on EC2 Limited. That's going to be my profile. I don't really need that many permissions for now. This profile is a very limited profile that basically just allows my instance to be accessed from Systems Manager, which we will need later on when we're logging in. And now everything's set up. All I need to do is click on Launch Instance, and that will start the process of setting up the instance. If I go back to the instance list here, you'll see that there's a new instance in the pending state. I'm going to wait for that to enter the running state. Once it's running, we'll be able to go up here and click on Connect, and then we'll be able to log into the instance without downloading the SSH key, without using a local terminal. We're going to use Session Manager, which is a built-in part of Systems Manager. So that's the tool we'll be using to log in. This is a nice, handy, built-in way to get into the terminal, and this works for both Linux and Windows. Okay, so let's wait a little bit. The connection button's still grayed out. We'll give it a minute. Okay, so having waited a minute, I can now select the instance, hit connect. I will then choose Session Manager, which should be running on the instance already. It's included, I believe, in the Ubuntu 24 image. So I then click connect. That'll open up a new tab and drop me into a Session Manager console session on the instance. Okay, and you can see right now we're actually logged in as the SSM user. I don't really want to do everything as the SSM user. I want to use the sort of default primary user on Ubuntu AMIs from Amazon, which is Ubuntu. So we're going to switch over to Ubuntu. You'll see when we do that we're still inside this Amazon SSM agent folder, which is where SSM user sessions start. We don't want to be there, so we'll hit CD to go back to the Ubuntu users home directory. We now have a little, initial housekeeping to do. We want to do some updates. So I'll do sudo apt get update. Then of course we'll run apt get upgrade. Yes, I'll say yes to all these changes. You'll see if you look really closely at this that it looks like we're going to rebuild Linux headers and probably be building a new kernel. So it looks like we're going to end up building a new kernel here, which means that when this process is done, I'm going to have to reboot. So I'll go ahead and cut forward to when it's time to reboot. Okay, great. You can see the magical generating initRD.image step showing up here, which is a sure sign that we've built a new kernel and we need to restart. So we're going to do that. Before I do that, let's do apt get auto clean and apt get auto remove, which should go ahead and get things squeaky clean. So apt's package cache should now be cleared and any orphaned packages would have been removed. Looks like nothing was removed, which is great, but later on after we've started installing and uninstalling our own tools, we might end up in a state where we've got stuff in the cache or old packages that we need to get rid of. So good to run those commands occasionally. Okay, so you'll see when I did sudo reboot, obviously I got kicked out of my session and I'm sort of back at the session manager default terminal. And I'm in fact not connected to anything. Like if I try to type, nothing happens. I can actually click terminate. That'll obviously end my session and close the tab. And then once the machine has rebooted, I'll be able to go back in and reconnect and continue on with setting up Diffy, which is our next step. Okay, cool. So we've waited just a second here. I can, of course, tick the little box next to my instance, click connect. The connect button in the session manager tab here is orange, beautiful Amazon orange, which means I'm ready to click on it and get connected back to systems manager, session manager. And of course, same routine. We want to switch over to the Ubuntu user, move to their home directory, and now finally we're ready to begin setting up Diffy. We've got a bunch of stuff we need to do. If you had Docker installed before, you would have to make sure to remove any old Docker stuff at this point. If you don't have Docker installed, which hopefully you don't, this is a brand new clean environment, then we need to go ahead and add the Docker package repository and rerun apt get update and do a bunch of work to make that all work. Then we'll be able to run apt get install and install the Docker components. So I'm going to copy paste all of the commands to set up the Docker repo because they're long. There's a blog post linked in the description where I include all these commands. So if you don't want to have to, type all that by hand, look in the description, go visit that blog post. It explains everything you need to know about the whole setup process. It's the companion to this video. Okay, so I've now added all that, which means we're in a position to go ahead and run the installs. So there's a bunch of stuff to install. So again, I'm going to paste that command in and let's see what happens. It looks like it is working. Everything's ready to be fetched and installed. It's about 383 megabytes worth of stuff. I'll say yes, I do want to continue. Once we've installed everything, Docker should start right up all on its own, and we should be able to run Docker run hello world, which will pull down and run the sort of hello world intro container that you should always run when you're testing a new Docker installation. However, we have not actually done everything we need to do to run Docker as a non-root user, so I do have to throw sudo in front here. So I'll say sudo run hello world. Fantastic. You can see it's pulling down that container and the hello world prompt prints out. So now let's try that again, but as the Ubuntu user. So I need to first make sure that there is a group called Docker. Oops, too many D's on my group add. Okay, it's already there. Great. Sudo usermod add to group Docker current user. This shell variable here is going to have Ubuntu in it. It auto-populates with the current user. So that'll add the Ubuntu user to the Docker group. And then running new group Docker will sort of force the shell, the current shell session, to recognize that I'm a member of that group. So what should now happen is I should be able to run Docker run hello world, no extra steps needed. And sure enough, right away the Hello World Docker container runs much faster than last time because, of course, we've already downloaded the image. Okay, so I now need to go ahead and install the AWS CLI. This isn't strictly required for installing Diffy, but it's a step that I like to do anytime I set up a machine like this, just in case I need to, fetch something from an S3 bucket or maybe make a backup into S3. It's just good to have the AWS CLI available. So I've installed unzip, which I'm going to need to unpack the installer. The installer itself comes from this URL at the bottom of my screen. And again, this is one of those things that's in the blog that's linked to in the description. So if you're wondering where to get that, go look in the description. If I do ls, you can see I now have the AWS CLI sitting here in my home directory. I unzip it with my freshly installed unzip command. I then run the installer, which is in there. It's just called install. That will go ahead and put AWS CLI where it needs to be. If I run AWS S3 ls, the command should fail with a permissions error because the IAM instance profile attached to my EC2 instance does not have permission to do what I'm trying to do. I did not give it any S3 permissions at all. However, I can see that the AWS command is indeed installed and working, so that's good enough for me. All right, we need to continue on. So before we can actually get Diffy to a point where it's accessible to the outside world, we're going to have to install a proxy and also get a SSL certificate so that we can be secure. So I need to do a couple things. The first one is I want to install Nginx. So we'll do that first. The Nginx install under Ubuntu is pretty straightforward. I don't need to do really anything special to get it set up and running. It should just run by itself out of the box after it's installed. So if I now go to diffybox.jeremypeterson.com, you'll see the welcome to Nginx screen. Right now we've got no encryption, so let's fix that next. To do that, I need to install certbot and the Python tools for certbot, which I'm going to do with this command. Again, it comes straight from the blog in the description. So I'll do that. Yes, I want to install all of those things, and then I'll be able to use certbot to apply for a new SSL certificate that matches my domain name, diffybox.jeremypeterson.com. Once you're done filling all that in, it will show you where the certificate is saved and where your private key is saved. So they're in this path here. In my case, that path is obviously going to be different if you have a different domain name than I used. And now that that's done, we're actually at the point where it's time to install Diffy. And we'll also actually have to do some additional work to sort of point Nginx at Diffy, but we'll get around to that in a couple of minutes. So we now need to get Diffy. So Diffy is an open source project. Their latest and greatest deployment instructions and code are on GitHub. So I'm going to use git clone to fetch Diffy from the LangGenius group here on github.com. It'll take a minute. It's fairly large, so I need to wait for it to fetch. I will then go into the Diffy folder. Within there, there's a subfolder called Docker. That's where the Docker setup stuff is. And you'll see there's like a Docker Compose YAML file. We'll be using that to actually get things running. That Docker Compose file defines the Docker containers that need to run in order for Diffy to function. We shouldn't need to change too much in there. What we do need to change, though, again, is the Nginx settings. And also, there's an env file here, which you can't see because it's a hidden file. But see this .env.example file? We're going to need to modify that. There are some parameters in there that have to be changed because we actually want Diffy to sit behind a proxy. So I'm going to do cp.env.example to .env. Great. Now I use Vim to open up env and start editing it. If you are new to Vim, and I've said this in every video I've posted so far where I've used Vim, it can be a little confusing. So we'll do the sort of using the Vim editor speed tour. If you've watched my other videos and you know how to do this, or if you're like a long-standing Vim user, just skip ahead about a minute. So when you first open a file in Vim, like I've done just now, you're in command mode. In command mode, you cannot actually change the file character by character. You can only enter commands. For instance, if you wanted to save your changes and quit, you'd do the colon key and then WQ. And then when you're done with that, you'd hit the enter key. That would make you leave. So let's say I want to save my changes, W, and I want to quit, Q, enter, and I have now quit. If you missed that, it was in the far lower left corner. That's where Vim tells you what it's doing. Colon, WQ. So actually, I'll draw an arrow to it so you can see it. That's what I did. I then hit enter, and of course I then quit back to the terminal. If I want to edit the file directly, I type I. I just hit the character I. I don't need shift or anything, just the letter I. That will put me in insert mode. Unlike command mode, insert mode is all about editing the file, so I can now use the arrow keys to navigate around. If I use backspace, it'll remove things. If I type, it'll add things. That's insert mode. Leaving insert mode is super easy. I can go back to command mode with escape. That's all it takes. So I've hit the escape key, and you'll notice that when I've done that, the little insert text down here, sorry, right here, is gone because I'm now back in command mode. Another handy thing, which is actually going to be useful to us right now, is forward slash. Forward slash and then a term will search for that term in the document. So in a longer config file like this, that's actually super handy. So let's say I want to find expose nginx. Sorry, there should have been an underscore there. Ah, perfect. That's exactly the part of the file I want to be in. So you'll see it's highlighted it. It's found that term here, right? So again, forward slash and the term you're looking for. It shows me where it found it, and I can just now hit enter, and it will leave me on that line where it found matching text. And I want to change these ports to 8080 and 8443, so I hit I for insert mode, type in an 80, use the arrow keys to get down here, add an 8. I then, of course, type escape to go back into command mode, escape, and then colon WQ. Colon WQ is to quit. So colon WQ to quit. All right, so I hit enter. We've saved our changes. We've now changed everything about the env file that we needed to change. Next up, we need to make sure that nginx is forwarding traffic to port 8080. I know that's a little bit confusing, right? Because it said expose nginx port. That's actually because Diffy itself includes a proxy. So we're putting a proxy in front of a proxy. It's kind of ugly, I know, but it makes managing the SSL certs a little easier, which is why I've done it that way. So we need to go now change the nginx setup to make sure we're forwarding traffic to port 8080, which is where Diffy will be listening. So we go here, etc nginx sites available. If we look in there, there's a default document. Before I edit that default setup config file, I'm actually going to make a copy of it. I don't like to edit stuff and not have a backup. Whoops, sorry, we'll need sudo cp for that. This is a protected file. I then do sudo vim to edit default. Great, here we are. This top part, don't edit this. So that's my first piece of advice. I've made that mistake a couple times when I've set up Diffy. This part of the nginx config is for traffic coming in on port 80, and it's already set up to forward that traffic to port 443. Don't need to touch it. What I need to do is go further down and find the listener for 443. So I'll just, we'll use the arrow key, go down a little bit. Should be right underneath this port 80 listener. Yes, here you can see. A little harder to see, but this guy, right? It's another server block, and it says SSL config. This is the one we want to edit. This is the good stuff. We need to make a couple minor changes here. First things first, we need to comment out this index.html line here. We're actually not serving up a static site from the directory nginx is looking in. We're using Diffy for that. Therefore, this root directory is also the wrong place for nginx to be looking. This server name, though, is correct. We're going to leave that. I just tabbed it in a little bit because I like everything to line up. So I just moved it over, but we're going to leave that. And then we are going to comment out this entire location block here, and we're going to make a new one, which I'll actually paste in. And again, you'll notice I'm in insert mode this entire time. I'm inserting things. All right, so copy. Try files has now been commented out. Fantastic. Above that old location block that we've commented out, I'm going to paste in a very new, very complicated looking block, which was provided to me by that blog post that's in the description. And this does all kinds of stuff to make sure that traffic gets forwarded to port 8080. It also makes sure that redirects and buffering are off. We need that stuff to be off so that certain features of Diffy are going to work correctly, such as uploading image files and PDFs and that sort of thing. Okay, we're now ready to go ahead and save our changes. So again, colon, WQ, enter. Great, we've now saved our changes. If we want to test that we didn't make a mistake, I do sudo nginx-t, T for test, and it will say config file looks okay. I then go ahead and restart nginx. Now at this point, if you were to go look at the nginx test page, something peculiar will be happening. It is encrypted, which is great, but we're getting a 502 bad gateway error. What's happening is Nginx is trying to forward traffic to port 8080 on localhost on the EC2 instance where Diffy's running, except that Diffy's not running. We haven't actually started Diffy yet, so now it's time to go back to our home directory with cd, then go into Diffy, and then go into Docker. And now it's time to run docker compose up-d. And that's actually going to pull down all of the different components of Diffy, get them running, get them talking to each other, set up Docker networking, and start everything up so that it's listening on the correct port. So what we'll do is we'll just wait for that to finish. It's going to take a couple of minutes. I'll skip forward to when we're ready to continue with the setup. Okay, so you can see the networking setup has been completed and all of the containers that are required for Diffy to work have been started. If I were to run docker ps, you'll see there's a big old list of them running, including this local Diffy-specific Nginx container, which is listening on port 8080. We should now be able to go back to Diffybox and see something different this time, which should be the Diffy setup page. It might take a minute to load the first time, especially if, like me, your server is in a region that's pretty far from you. The first thing you're going to see is the user setup page. Once it's running, you'll see the user setup page first. This is your opportunity to set a username and password, so you might actually not want to make it available to the internet the first time you do this, because obviously if someone were to beat you to it, they could set the administrator username and password, which are not yet set at this stage. So here we are. I'm going to plug in an email address. We'll make my username JDP. I need to just choose a password and then we'll hit setup. And you'll see it takes us to the Let's Get Started page. Plug in my email address. I don't even know, to be honest, why they have a differentiation between email address and username, because you log in using your email address. But anyway, here I am. I'm going to go get logged in with my new password and my email. Hit sign in, and I'm now in Diffy. And you'll see I can set up knowledge bases, so I can set up and vectorize sets of PDFs or other resources, and then my agents or my chatbots can actually search those to provide augmented answers. So you can do RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, right? So this is a cool way to give your chatbot specific knowledge. You can also create multiple chatbots, agents, and tools and whatnot from the app creator here. So if I choose create from blank, I can make a standard chatbot, which will have a conversation with me. I can make a text generator tool, which is effectively just calls an LLM once. I pass it an input or a prompt. It produces one output, one and done. I can create an agent, which is effectively a chatbot that can use tools. So it can like search Wikipedia or do other things using tools that I give it. And then there's workflow, which basically follows a workflow that's more customized than what the agent can do and potentially has multiple steps and uses multiple tools. I'm not going to actually go through and show you how to do that. That's probably a topic for another video. If you're wondering how you get access to LLMs, right, if you need Gen AI models here, if you need a large language model like OpenAI's GPT-4o, how do you incorporate that? Well, you go into the account settings under your username in the upper right-hand corner here, and you go to settings, and there's a model provider section, and this is the really, really cool part. You can use all kinds of different providers. They've got Azure, Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, NVIDIA, Cohere, pretty much every modern model provider. AWS Bedrock is in here as well, and then Mistral AI. And if you go further down, they've even got a bunch of the Chinese model providers. All these local model providers are supported as well. So if you're doing something China related, also kind of cool, you might want to try checking out some of those Chinese model providers. And the setup's pretty straightforward. Let's say I want to set up OpenAI. I just click set up. I paste my API key in. All these other fields are optional. I then hit save, and then I'll be able to use any of those models, select an OpenAI model just from a dropdown, and use it to create one of these bots or agents. And that's really it. And hopefully I'll have time to go into that in more detail in a future video. But for now, you know how to set this all up on your own. And just a heads up, if setting this kind of thing up is not your cup of tea, like you're not an infrastructure person, but you still want to use Diffy, you can. They have a managed service. If you just go to diffy.ai, you can sign up, and then you can use all the stuff you just saw, this cool interface, from diffy.ai instead, and then you don't have to run it yourself. So there is an option to use it directly through their website if you want to do that. And I've just flipped over to the sign up page so you can see what that costs. Obviously, not cheap if you're an enterprise or a team, but if you just want to try it out, you can make a couple of calls, set up a couple of bots, up to 10 bots for free in the sandbox environment, right? So you can have one person, 10 apps, you get 5 MB of vector storage, which is enough for a couple of PDFs just so you can test out adding a knowledge base. So if you just want to get started, there is a free tier that's pretty cool. All right, and that's it for this video. See you in the next one.